Good evening. My name is Steve Kozeniewski. I'm the author of Billy and the Cloneasaurus, and you're participating in the Bookshine Bandit Summer of Sci-Fi. Today, Hazel Butler asked me to make a video log, or vlog, or vlog for you good people, and the subject that I've chosen is how to write a good sci-fi villain. The key to villainy, if you want to call it that, is to always remember that a villain is the hero of his own story. We've long since passed the time of the very old-fashioned idea of, a snaggle-nosed guy in a black hat tying up a woman on the railroad tracks and that kind of thing. Old-fashioned villains were, cruel and evil in an unreasonable way. They were villains for the sake of being villains. So these days when you write a story, you have to think about what the motivation of the antagonist is. And if it's easier for you than to think of it as heroes and villains, it might be better to think of it as antagonists and protagonists. And what's important about this method is the antagonist and the protagonist both want something. It's also important, we're not really talking about heroes with this video, but when you have your hero, you want him or her to have a desire, have a goal, have something that they're striving towards. So you want to apply that same logic to your villain. They're not just tying somebody up on the railroad tracks. They're not just laying traps for the hero. They may be doing that, but it's for a goal. It's for something that they want internally. It's part of making a good character, is to make sure that they have motivations, that they have reasons for doing what they do, and they're not just doing it for the heck of it. So when you think about some of the greatest or the most interesting villains, one that always springs to mind and is very common in these sort of discussions is Magneto. So you have Professor X and you have Magneto. They started out in the 60s. They both wanted the same thing. They were friends. They worked together. They both had a goal of a better world for mutants. And they had the same goal, but they started to diverge when they wanted a different way of achieving that goal. So Professor X wanted the mutants to be part of society, to protect the Muggles, or whatever you call ordinary humans in the X-Men world. And Magneto wanted, he considered the mutants to be the Homo superior. So that's a very common motivation for a villain, is that they think they're better, or they think that they are more worthy of, that their goals are more important than other people's goals, because of who they are, because they're better than other people. And this is, it's cliche, but it kind of goes back to the Nazis, who are kind of the classical villains of history, who believed in the idea of a Superman, and that what they did was right because they did it, essentially, because of the triumph of the will and that sort of thing. So, Magneto and Professor X are a very interesting villain and hero pair because they're very closely connected. They started out as friends before they diverged in what they wanted, and when they clash, it's not because Magneto just, for the heck of it, wants to make trouble for Professor X. It's because they have divergent goals. So you can apply this to, any story at a fundamental level. The goal of the hero is to kill the dragon and save the maiden, and the goal of the dragon is to keep the maiden and keep his treasure, or whatever. But that's not really what makes interesting villains. Interesting villains are the heroes of their own story. So you've got to put yourself into the shoes of the villain and ask yourself why they're doing what they're doing, why their goal would diverge from the heroes. Now, to get a little bit deeper into it, a very well, fairly recent. It's been 7 years now that I think about it. But a very good example of a hero and villain dynamic came in The Dark Knight, the film in 2008 about Batman and the Joker. And one of the things that they actually came right out and said in the film was, you have rules, he's talking about Batman, and I don't have any. So this is one of the things that makes villains fun to write and to play. And if you ask actors, they'll often say that their favorite roles are villains. And if you ask writers like me, we'll often say that our favorite thing to write is villains. Because the villain, they typically take like I was saying, they'll think of themselves as Superman, or if not as Superman, as superior in some way, and that their goal is superior in some way. And that means that the ends justify the means. So often what separates your villain from your hero is your hero has to be constantly worrying about the morality of any given situation. So he or she might let a child die to save 1,000 other people, but he would be torn by that goal. Whereas the villain would say, well, of course, if it's going to help my goal, of course you let that person die because it saves 1,000 other people. And another one of the classic examples of that springs to my mind is the famous comic book or graphic novel Watchmen, where, I guess this is a spoiler alert if you haven't read it, Ozymandias, who is the villain of that piece, but very much in keeping with what we've been talking about, he considers himself the hero, and he's willing to allow the destruction of New York City in a nuclear blast because in doing that, it ends the Cold War and saves billions of lives. So for a few million lives, he trades in for a few billion lives. So something that seems highly immoral when you look at it serves a greater morality to the villain. So in science fiction specifically, which is what we're talking about, we have greater stakes than you can really even have in non-science fiction writing. So you're going to have stakes like the world, many worlds, the galaxy, all of time and all of the universe. These are the kind of stakes that you're going to be dealing with. So for the villains in science fiction, they are, of course, coming from a place of being the heroes of their own story, and where I'll destroy this world to save many. A good example of that is someone who seems otherwise kind of like a cardboard villain. I don't know that George Lucas put a lot of thought into it, but Grand Moff Tarkin in the original Star Wars trilogy was willing to destroy a planet. He destroyed Alderaan. And again, I guess this is a spoiler if you've never seen Star Wars. If you're that one guy, you're that one person that never saw Star Wars. Grand Moff Tarkin destroys Alderaan because it serves his greater goal, which is to have order in the galaxy. So, if you look at it from the perspective of, Luke and his friends, and Leia especially, who's from Alderaan, oh my God, the destruction of a world, this is a big deal, this is, the loss of my world, he's so immoral. But when you think about it from the villain's perspective, he did the right thing for a theoretical greater good that he was following. So, basically, these are some of the tips and tricks that I find in writing science fiction for making a good villain. And one great thing about it is that they don't come across so much as cardboard. When a villain has especially if a villain has a goal that you would agree with in a, functional sense. Like, oh, well, his goal is pretty good. Like Magneto's goal, he wants to take care of his people. Especially if they have a good goal and they're willing to do anything to achieve it. And that may be what separates them from the hero. So Batman has rules, the Joker has no rules. Otherwise they might get along. Maybe, you don't know. But there you have it. That's just a couple of my thoughts on science fiction, villainy, how to write good motivations for your villains. Thanks for tuning in. Special thanks to Hazel Butler for hosting me and for hosting the Summer of Sci-Fi. And I hope you'll check out my book, Billy and the Cloneasaurus. And we'll see you next time.